Well, I think the nuclear free zones is it's educational in a way, but it's also self-delusionary, because here we are in Berkeley with, while the Lawrence Berkeley lab is not presumably not producing weaponry, it is connected to the Livermore lab that is producing weaponry, and they exchange back and forth ideas and so forth.
The nuclear free zone signs in Berkeley are kind of there as a reminder that people have struggled to have a nuclear free zone in Berkeley.
We had a nuclear reactor on the other side of the campus, for goodness sake. And when they took that reactor apart, they started putting up these signs that make people aware.
A lot of the history of nuclear physics and nuclear engineering actually started here in Berkeley. Glenn Seaborg, who was a nuclear chemist here on campus, was the person who discovered plutonium right here on campus, and that led to, of course, things like the atomic bombs.
There was a very great concern about the destruction of Western civilization because of the Nazi takeover in Europe, and who was going to win the war, and what if the Nazis won the war, and what if they had the bomb, and so on and so forth. And that escalated into a desire to beat them to it, in quotes. And in the process of beating them to it, we, of course, eventually made the bomb, and not only made it, but dropped it twice. I think there was the comment made several times that the physicists had sinned. And in order to make up for the sin of dropping the bombs and using them for military purposes, there were many people, scientists, who wanted to find out if they could use it for non-military purposes, for civilian purpose. And so developed the idea of nuclear power.
On the one hand, a devastating weapon. On the other, a tool of 1,000 peaceful uses. The people of the world have the choice, if only they can work it out together.
People felt they had to show that this technology could be used for good purposes, peaceful purposes.
And we thank God that it has come to us instead of to our enemies. And we pray that He may guide us to use it in His ways and for His purposes.
The things became very negative to the nuclear, especially after the accident at the 3 Mile Island in '79 and the Chernobyl in '85, '86.
Well, there was a very strong and successful anti-nuclear movement, and it was tied to proliferation as well. It's a very vibrant movement. And we didn't build a nuclear plant in this country since the 70s, late 70s. So in that sense, it was successful.
We are announcing roughly $8 billion in loan guarantees to break ground on the first new nuclear plant in our country in 3 decades. We're going to have to build a new generation of safe, clean nuclear power plants in America.
3 problems: nuclear waste, cost, civil liberties. They still haven't solved those problems. But they now call it clean and renewable.
There are 104 reactors, commercial reactors in the United States, and every year about 3,000 tons of spent nuclear fuel is generated. For the past half century or so, we have generated about 60,000 30,000 metric tons of spent fuel. And we have to dispose of that spent fuel in a safe manner. And how long and how safe is safe enough is two main questions we are facing right now.
As far as the waste which is currently stored, I think the waste is reasonably well secured, but there are casks of this stuff sitting around. The government has done extensive studies of how resistant these casks are to things hitting them or falling off of trucks, and they're reasonably safe, but we don't want to store the nuclear waste there for very long. We know how to chemically reprocess the fuel, which means that the stuff that you have left needs to be stored for a much shorter period of time. So you don't need to know that it will last 1,000,000 years, maybe only 100,000 years, which is a lot easier to do.
The notion that you can somehow store the nuclear waste in such a way that 40,000 years from now, if people went into that area, they would still know it's a dangerous area and they mustn't go into it. It's just, it doesn't show any understanding of history or what it takes to have people's memory last longer than, very short spans of time.
They're always chasing around the country looking for an empty place to put the to put the waste, and there is no empty place, because one person's empty place is a sacred burial ground to someone, or it's certainly a habitat for some kind of wildlife, and we are destroying the ecosystems, and we have to stop doing that.
Cancer rate in the areas where the nuclear industry has developed, from Hanford all the way to the southwest, it's been really devastating, and it has been hidden.
The Hanford site was opened in 1943, the beginning of the Manhattan Project, and that's where they created plutonium for the world's first plutonium-based bombs. And it was in production throughout the whole Cold War until 1990. Since 1990, they've been doing an environmental restoration project at Hanford until now, getting about $2 billion a year. And despite that, less than 2% of the contamination at Hanford has been contained. Most of the waste at Hanford is in leaking tanks because it was put into tanks that were meant to last, 25 to 50 years, and it's been longer than that. Right now, Hanford is storing 53 million gallons of radioactive waste in 177 underground tanks. And over the course of the production years, 440 billion gallons of radioactive liquid were inserted into the ground intentionally. There's groundwater plumes of waste that are going towards the Columbia River. You find waste in the flora and fauna. We took a bunch of fish out of the river just to see whether there was contamination in them. And we took 18 fish, and 17 out of the 18 had plutonium in them. And then the amount of waste that would go into the river is insanely big.
They weren't thinking so much about environmental issues, and unfortunately a lot of decisions were made that we wouldn't make today. There are canisters that were sort of carelessly or not very carefully buried. They've leaked, and radioactive material has seeped into the Columbia River, and yes, a great deal of effort is needed to clean it up. I'm optimistic they will be able to do it, but it's going to take a long time and a lot of money.
And cleaning up means that you put it somewhere that's not going to leak for 50 years. It doesn't mean that it's safe for the 10,000 years that it's going to last. One of the problems with nuclear waste and nuclear energy is that we don't have an effective way to store the waste.
There is no permanent storage right now. So right now, we have no plan. Okay.
They don't even know where a lot of the contamination is because literally people went out with tractors, dug a hole in the ground, put waste in, covered it up, did not mark it, did not write down that they did that.
The waste is very dangerous. If you hug the waste canister, you will die immediately.
Like these women I was working with, they were at the site of a spill where 85 gallons of highly radioactive waste spilled onto the ground. They inhaled the vapors from it, and now are disabled. And Hanford won't admit that they're sick from the waste, even though they were right next to it.
We are aware of the risk of radiation very well, and so there are very good, well-established regulation for safety.
Government agencies in charge of the cleanup are in charge of mitigating risk and making the area safe But they don't even admit that when a worker is at a spill and got sick from the waste, they won't admit that they're sick from the waste. So you have to question how effective they're going to be at mitigating risk for the whole area.
The nuclear industries have been doing a good job of limiting the health risk to the public as low as possible.
So we have this belief that we'll be able to figure out a solution to nuclear waste. And that's always what happens in these conversations about nuclear energy, is that people will say, well, we'll find a solution. We walked on the moon. We can do it.
Although the waste products are lethal to almost all forms of life for thousands of years, we will sort that out later. So don't think global warming, think nuclear. Would we lie to you?
But I really believe that until there is a solution for storing nuclear waste that we can trust, and when you find some predictive capacity where you can figure out how to mark something in 10,000 years into the future in some language and figure out what kind of governing structure is going to be there in 10,000 years in the future, great. Then I will get behind nuclear energy. But until that is there, it doesn't make any sense to me.
It includes some ethical issues as well. We enjoyed the electricity and the benefit from isotope usage, and the waste will be remaining as a potential source of risk for future generations.
Can you have nuclear reactors and plutonium and uranium issues in a democracy? You have to guard the nuclear plants, you have to guard the waste, you have to make sure the transference of this material from one place to another. Nobody's stealing it, nobody's tying it into nuclear weapons, making of nuclear weapons, and so on. It is a centralizing technology. That is, you're going to have more police, you're going to have more attentiveness and so forth to civil liberty questions.
So a lot of people are concerned about nuclear power plants as being potential targets. The power plants that are being designed today are cognizant of that fact and designed to withstand any kind of attack you can imagine. Most of the future ones will be built with the reactor itself buried underground, also with a large containment building above it. So it would be very difficult to damage that by any kind of attack you can imagine a terrorist group doing.
We need nuclear technology because we have lots of nuclear materials and nuclear wastes. Without nuclear technologies, we cannot manage those things very well, and we would like to keep the leadership in the world.
If we want this country to be an empire rather than a democracy, then I can see how this fits the mindset of empires. But empires don't last. When they cost it, they never life cycle it. They don't talk about the uranium mines and what's happened to the natives in the Southwest. They don't talk about Hanford, for that matter, and what's happened to the whole area around Hanford. So before you ever get to building a nuclear plant, there's a whole history of pollution and waste and cancer and deformities and so forth.
About 2/3 of the Department of Energy's budget goes to maintaining the nuclear industrial complex. And so the amount of money that's actually being put towards developing non-nuclear or non-fossil-based or non-coal-based energy is actually a very small percentage of the budget in comparison. So we spend more on maintaining nuclear waste than we do on developing new energy.
Global warming, an unwanted byproduct of the modern world. Created by our ever-increasing need for power.
Other than oil and gas, we don't have much energy anymore. The population is increasing in the world, and so to match the demand and supply I think nuclear is the only option right now.
In spite of desires to have green energy sources, renewables, wind, solar, the people who've looked at this very carefully have all concluded that none of those things can make up the amount of energy we're going to need, and the only way to do it is through nuclear power plant development.
We don't have enough material in the world, in the planet, to live the way we've been living and to encourage the whole rest of the world to consume the way we've been consuming.
We have to start talking about what are we using the energy for, how much do we really need, what are we doing in society that takes so much energy, how can we do things differently, how can we plan things differently so that we don't use so many cars, so that we don't have to make as many trips. You know, there's a lot of other ways to do things and to live in a way that's in more harmony with nature and with our environment and our future.
We think that certain things bring technological progress, but don't bring social progress. So maybe we should redefine what progress is and live a different way.
Most people in the United States can certainly reduce their consumption with no problem.
It turns out not such a bad idea, that more energy does not necessarily make people happier.
The science has kind of become an artifact, but the problem is we have a big hole in our nuclear-free zone in Berkeley, and that's the University of California, because the Berkeley law cannot apply to the University of California. It is its own entity. But the fact is, as long as there's still nuclear research going on at the university, we still have a long way to go if we are serious about being opposed to nuclear power.